So, welcome to the Transport Select Committee. Could you give us your names and organisation, please? Let's start.
Okay, my name's Alastair. I'm the Chief Executive of the Driver Vehicle Standards Agency.
Right, thank you.
I'm Oliver Morley. I'm Chief Executive of the DVLA.
Thank you.
Paul Markwick, Chief Executive of Vehicle Certification Agency.
Right, thank you very much. Mr. Morley, could you tell us what work the DVLA has undertaken this year towards achieving your savings target?
Absolutely. So for the year gone by, we've made...
As part of that, isn't it?
Yes, that's for the most part a switch to, well, I would probably say rather than digital, on services that are performed centrally within Swansea. In the case of the local office network changes, a personalised registration service was not available at the time, but we've moved to 51.5% of our total services being online.
And is that following the programme you've got? Are you on target?
We are on target in terms of digital delivery, except I would say in terms of our targets we are missing them on the driver side, so we're not quite where we would want to be in terms of the delivery of, in terms of people using our driving licensing services. That's partly because identity is obviously harder to assure online, whereas on the vehicle side it's quite easy to ensure that a vehicle is taxed online. It's much harder to ensure that you have the right person when it comes to identity, and that means, for example, on provisional licences, quite often people drop out at that stage.
How often does that happen?
I couldn't give you the exact figures, but it does mean that it's not a technical issue. It's simply that, for example, we provide an automatic fulfilment of the passport photo if they have one that's up to date. If you're an 18-year-old, you may not be that interested in using your passport photo from 5 years ago.
Mr. Peoples, could you tell us what's happened since the merger of DSA and VOSA took place in terms of operations and the work that takes place? What's changed?
Well, at one level, very little has changed in terms of frontline delivery. I've been at great pains to ensure that our customers do not see the merger issues, which are clearly organisational, happening behind the scenes. So we've been at great pains to ensure that we keep our frontline delivery as best as we can be, and that's been a great sense of pride from me and the organisation. Behind the scenes, quite a lot has happened. We clearly have a new name. We launched the organisation on the 2nd of April. We are looking at a single headquarters now, and we've decided where that headquarters would be and informed the staff, and are migrating folk along that way. We're looking to recruit a permanent board, and at the same time we have met largely all of our targets for last year, with some small exceptions, and we've created one business plan for this year going forward, so it's just under the name of DVSA.
What savings have you made?
In terms of the savings to date, it'd be fair to say that whatever savings we've made have been largely in the pipeline anyway. We have come out on the VOSA side a year ahead of our deficit reduction, so we wanted to clear that £47 million deficit in 5 years. We've done that ahead of time, and you may recall when I was last here we were pushing the ATF strategy. We've now reached that magic figure of 80% of all work is outside VOSA, and we've now got some in the Highlands and Islands, and indeed some of the Scottish Islands as well. So we've done that. On the DSA side, we've moved to look at a new regime in terms of ADI check testing and looking at the grading at that. So there's been a lot of structural work behind the scenes to making sure we operate as one, and a lot of work to try and get one business plan that is improving services this year.
You're all operating digital by default systems, but how sure can you be that people who find difficulty in using those systems aren't being left out and disadvantaged? Mr. Markwick, can you give us your view on that?
The vast majority of the work the VCA does is business to business, and again, the majority of that is actually testing and witnessing physical property. So that is very difficult to do. It doesn't fit within the digital by default environment. But most of our communication now is completed digitally. So it's a slightly different scenario to my colleagues here as well, where we're not dealing with individuals, citizens as such. It's generally business to business.
So I think as far as you're concerned in your work, there isn't an issue here? because it's business to business?
Absolutely. So we have to, my engineers have to go and physically inspect property being tested, or inspect property in a technical environment, or even witness drawings, etc., at our clients' facilities.
Right, but that isn't the same for everyone, is it, Mr.
No.
Morley? What about you?
No, I mean, quite clearly we have a considerable physical presence. I would say, rather than digital by default, we are effectively multi-channel. We have 55 million, well, over 100 million transactions a year. We have 55 million via online, but certainly we do a considerable amount of transactions through the post office, and we would expect to continue to do so. For example, we receive now around 3.5 million cheques and postal orders a year, a considerable number of postal orders, which we still fully expect to continue seeing in the future.
Mr. Peoples?
Well, we clearly have a multi-channel approach as well, Chair. I mean, clearly in terms of a vehicle test or a driving test, people have to arrive in person. But in terms of the application, we either have digital, by post, or we have a contact centre as well, recognising that people have a needed choice.
Ms. Champion?
Thank you. Mr. Peters, if I can take you back to the merger. Round about Christmas time, I started to get an awful lot of casework coming from my constituents about how slow your organisation was to respond to them. Can you give any assurances that that backlog is going to be cleared, or that you've dealt with whatever it was that was slowing down?
Was this in any particular area?
It was people with trying to get sort of medical conditions, and their changes to licences and changes to I can't remember.
Yeah, if it's on the driving licence side, it wouldn't be DVSA. We deal with the test or the theory test, but certainly in terms of the customer service, we've been very keen to improve our customer service. Indeed, we were reappointed with the Customer Service Excellence Award, so that was a commitment to saying that we do really need to put our customers first. We've also had a look at what the complaints were about and how many of those were moving to the second level, and moved swiftly to address some of those and pull those back. Indeed, looking at the most recent figures, our complaints are actually falling, which is good for the first year of a merger when things could have been potentially much worse.
And are you now reaching your targets on dealing with those complaints?
In terms of our targets now, yes, but it's clearly very early in the year. We're working hard to look at what is causing the complaints rather than just dealing with them, but we do set our stall out by trying to deal with these within target.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Right. Mr. McCartney?
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, good morning. Obviously gave us some good news about your reduction in costs, but is that coming at the price that we are perhaps paying because you're maybe making more money selling our data? Has that gone up or down in the past few years? How do you see the trend for that?
Well, on the as actually was as a result of an FOI in the press, we're actually making a loss on every single one of those charges. We charge around £2.50 for the physical requests on data. Certainly, it isn't our intent to either lose money or make money. It certainly seems that a charge at cost is appropriate, and it's not something in the future that DVLA is looking to do. Our focus is on delivering to landowners via parking companies, if necessary, information on those people who are parking based on reasonable cause. And that's effectively what we're doing. Reasonable cause as defined by both the Information Commissioner and more generally.
I'm just going to drill down on that one, if that's all right, Chairman. So, in a fully commercial organisation, if you were doing something that wasn't making you any money and you were losing money, you would stop doing it. Are you going to stop or improve?
Or we would adjust the prices. And I think really the most important thing is that we both make sure that is as digital as possible, so it's as low cost as possible. Make sure the pricing is appropriate, and the fees we charge for that is appropriate, and then ensure that we are auditing properly, which I'm sure you'll come on to.
You can understand why I'm asking the questions on behalf of my constituents.
Absolutely.
It's a topic that is raised.
And it's probably one of the biggest areas of complaints in terms of people not entirely understanding why we are providing the data after the right period, and ensuring that the right controls are in place so that data is used properly. But parking is itself a significant industry, and it's important that landowners do have control over who parks on their land.
Okay. Just have a question as well for Mr. Peoples, if that's okay, Chairman. It's regarding vehicles and perhaps whether they're Cat C, Cat D, or being brought back on the road. Historically, there's been long waiting lists for people to get appointments, no matter which office they try and make an appointment at, because you have a central booking system. which is a nightmare to deal with, as I know from personal experience and you know from the questions I've asked you previously. Has that improved, worsened, or stayed the same?
Well, we're clearly looking, as I said earlier on, looking at the complaints and trying to make things a lot better. It's early days in terms of the joined-up organisation, looking at what's the best of both organisations and trying to move both along. I think we are looking at the hotspots, not just in terms of booking, but in terms of examiners to actually conduct the test whenever the booking is made. And clearly the process of recruiting is slightly protracted at times in terms of the process, but we're working very hard to try and look at the hotspots and address those issues.
Okay, I see the problem getting worse over time because of the way cars are made and the fact that people can perhaps repair them cheaper than insurance companies would like. Therefore, do you see the problem going away or getting better or
well, I think there's one of these elements that we try our best to ensure that people understand how to prepare for test, whether it be a driving test or a vehicle test, and trying to deal with individuals in terms of what we put online, deal with organisations that can represent folk who are preparing vehicles or drivers for test, and trying to make them aware exactly what the standard is. Unfortunately, some people, particularly in vehicles, want to spend as little as possible. It's quite often they're bringing a vehicle for test just to get a list and then only fixing that. But we do what we can to try and ensure that people are well prepared.
Sorry, Chairman, I'm just going to go on to this point. I think you're missing my point, which is waiting 6 to 8 weeks to get your vehicle booked in and checked is regardless of how much work you want to do on it.
So this
I think that is an inordinate amount of time for anybody to wait to get a vehicle back on the road.
Are you're talking here about IVA and vehicle approvals? Yeah. Well, we have been working very hard with the industry to understand what volumes of tests are coming along. We have been looking at providing more facilities, and we have opened 20 private sector facilities to support that. We have doubled the resource in Swansea that actually deal with the applications, and we've trained a number of more people to be able to do that, and we're working very closely with the industry to understand what's coming down the pipeline to ensure that not only do we get the right people trained, but also in the right area. And I think the last time that we spoke, it was around how far would people be prepared to travel. So we've listened to that, and we're trying to forecast exactly where we need folk, and we do intend to get better, and we have been recruiting additional vehicle examiners as well.
Okay, thank you.
Were any disabled people involved when you set your web systems up, your digital systems? Mr. Peoples?
I'm sorry.
Were any disabled people involved?
We would have had a wide consultation group in terms of that. Clearly, on what was the former DSA side, I don't have the detail on that, but certainly on the VOSA side, we would have cast our net widely, trying to understand all the interest groups in that and making sure that we addressed them. But because we are multi-channel, it meant that if we didn't cover them or weren't able to cover them on the digital side, there was the opportunity to either come in person, by telephone, or to write in. So we felt that we would cover all the bases by that way.
But were any disabled people involved in the design?
I can't say specifically. I'm not aware of that, but I can check that out and write to you.
Mr. Morley, can you tell us?
Well, we conform with guidelines on assisted digital, particularly on our new systems. So some of the older systems, we wouldn't have necessarily conformed to those guidelines. We go through very extensive consultations. I wouldn't be able to tell you how many, but I would be confident that we had.
Mr. Markwick, you didn't believe that your work's relevant?
Again, yeah, we're working business to business, so our business is set up to attend to the global international automotive sector. So,
what about the standards of accessibility? Do you meet Web Content Accessibility Guidelines Standard 3, which is the maximum standard?
From our point of view, where it's a new service, we're conforming to the government's guidelines on assisted digital. So I couldn't say specifically to that guideline, but I would expect that the guidelines on assisted digital did include that.
Mr. Peoples?
Yeah, well, we'd be the same, and we have lots of legacy systems going back some time, but where there is a new system, we would make sure that we conform. And in terms of the things like customer service excellence, where we're being challenged in terms of what we do, we will always try and improve in terms of our service.
Mr. Markwick?
I can't quote those standards, but we conform to the government's requirements for web access.
Mr. Lumley?
Since the switch to the digital by default, have complaints gone up or down? Complaints about your service?
Well, our complaints have actually started to fall. I'm not aware whether on the former DSI side whether they went up or not, but certainly because of the multi-channel approach, if people were unable to access one way, we always had another opportunity for them to get in touch with us. And the fact that it was either a driver or a vehicle had to come in the final element, we were able to check out whether or not people had difficulty in terms of accessing the systems. So we are now starting to see a reduction in these complaints, again because we're looking at and analysing what is causing the complaints rather than just dealing with them when they come in.
Mr. Morley?
Just having a look at the statistics, see if I've got stuff going back. I'm confident that... Sorry, it's a strange echo that I'm creating. I'm confident that our complaints in terms of our total volume of complaints, it's very peculiar from here, that most of our complaints are not related to digital services. I'm also fairly confident, but I don't have the figure to hand, that our complaints went down last year. In the round, I should say that our complaint volume is extremely low. If you actually compare us with large online services, for example, Amazon and Love Film, they're one of the few online services that actually beat us in terms of satisfaction. So our satisfaction quality is extremely high, particularly from the public sector.
Yeah, we have overall very low numbers of complaints, none of them about digital. There are the odd complaint about CO2 figures, where we are publishing figures that we haven't necessarily generated ourselves, and people become dissatisfied with the fuel consumption figures of their own vehicles, and we get involved with those questions.
Mr. Stringer.
Just going back to Mr. McCartney's question, you said you made a loss on providing data to car parking companies. How much do you lose per transaction, and what is the sort of annual figure?
I can't recall exactly. I would have to come back to you on that.
You don't know how much you lost annually on that figure?
Not on the individual transaction. We're charging £2.50, and I think it wasn't a very significant amount per transaction, but I can't give you the exact amount.
How many transactions are there?
If you give me a second. I will be able to update you. 2.2 million sets of keeper details. But that doesn't mean we're charging each of those at £2.50. I should say that's the total number. That doesn't include the digital transactions, which are at a low cost.
And are that transfer of information, is it always to accredited trade associations?
It is, yes, all local authorities. No, sorry, 2.2 is to private parking companies.
And are they accredited?
They are accredited by the parking associations.
Right. And do the Department of Transport authorise that transfer of information?
Well, yes, as in terms of our relationship with their relationship with DVLA, yes.
So beyond the people who accredit the Trade Association, which is another independent body, isn't it? Do you have any knowledge of who you're passing that information to?
Yes, quite specifically. We expect them to adhere to the Parking Association's Code of Conduct, and we also then conduct our own independent audit.
And how much do you spend on that audit?
Again, I would have to come back to you for the exact figure.
Well, is it significant? Because this is a huge number of transactions.
Probably the best way to put it is we suspended 22 private parking companies last year, which I believe last time we came to you, we suspended only 4 in that year.
If that.
And a further 38 local authorities were also suspended as a result of data.
I mean, the last time you came, we were concerned that you were passing information over to thugs and cowboys, essentially. Can you assure the committee that you're not doing that now? I know that it's now against the law to clamp vehicles, but can you assure the committee that you're not passing over the information to disreputable companies?
I can assure you that we would wish to be as robust as we possibly can with parking companies, considering the scale of the industry. We cannot guarantee, but certainly we would wish to be as confident as we can. And that means strong audit. Sorry, and that would mean that our audit is robust.
And are you satisfied that the data you transfer is secure and doesn't go further than to the people you give it to?
Yes, our total number of data breaches last year were very, very small.
Right. What percentage of fines on foreign drivers are collected?
Well, that would be a matter, presumably, that would be a matter for the police. In terms of fines on foreign drivers, could you be a bit more specific by which you mean? As in parking fines?
I was meaning fines. You do fine foreign drivers, do you?
Well, not only in the case of vehicle tax enforcement, or.
Right. I'm my notes must be wrong then. I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
And Mr. Morley, I just want to
Yeah,
clarify your answers to Mr. Stringer about the Department for Transport. Do they specifically authorise what you're doing in this area?
In terms of reasonable cause, as I say, we have the guidance from the Information Commissioner, and the government's overall policy would be that parking companies are given the information where there is reasonable cause, i.e. where a landowner has illegal, parking that is not in contractual agreement with them on their land.
So the department authorise it?
Yes, given. Again, I'm not entirely sure what you're looking for in terms of authorisation here. Do we have a specific piece of evidence from DFT show that DVLA is authorised to pass that information on? I would have to come back to you for the grounds
Right,
on
well,
those.
I'd like you to do that. I think it's an
Be very
important
happy
point.
to.
Yeah, yes.
Sorry, Mr. Moss. I should have asked Mr. Peoples that question about percentage on foreign drivers. My notes were wrong and I carried on. Can you tell us what percentage of fines you collect off? What percentage of the fines that are levied you collect off foreign trucks?
One of the ones that we have most recently been supporting the department on are the HGV levy. So if I give you that one as an example. And in the first 3 weeks, we checked some 5,300 vehicles. And at that, there was about 95% compliance on the levy. We issued 249 fixed penalties in the first 3 weeks, and we took about £75,500 in terms of fines for that. Those were in terms of fixed penalties.
That's on foreign?
Those are in foreign vehicles, yeah.
So what's that a percentage of the fines levied on the fines collected?
I don't have the exact breakdown of all of them, but the main non-compliant vehicles were Southern Irish vehicles at 17% and Dutch vehicles at 10.4% non-compliant. So of those prohibitions, the percentage would be of that in those two particular countries.
Some of the written evidence we've had suggested that there is more income to be had from pursuing more rigorously the fines. What would be your comment on that criticism?
Well, on the levy, we are introducing automatic number plate reader, which will make that much more robust, and clearly in the early stages more of this was in terms of people on the ground. So as we introduce the ANPR scheme and widely roll that out and join it up with the existing DVSA network, we will be even better in terms of 24/7 on that. In terms of the on-road enforcement that we do, we need to be consistent in terms of the proportionality of foreign vehicles to GB vehicles that we stop. I think it's fair to say that our targeting of foreign vehicles has got better, particularly at ports, and we are looking at ensuring that we are very robust in that. Where we see non-compliance on either foreign or GB vehicles, we follow that up robustly. We either take a fine in lieu of attendance at court, or we issue a fixed penalty. Where that isn't paid and it's appropriate, we will impound the vehicle, immobilise it at the roadside, and ensure that the penalty is paid before we immobilise it. So we are robust in terms of what we do, but we need to be proportionate in terms of who we stop.
What is the total outstanding on fines and penalties then?
In terms of fixed penalties, we would be taking that money at the roadside, so there'd be very little. We do take a deposit in lieu of a fine, so I wouldn't say it's 100%, but it is very high. I don't have the exact figures, but I can follow that up with you. But we are quite robust and quite experienced in terms of knowing our customer base, as it were, and so we're quite robust in ensuring that we do put the appropriate penalty and lift that amount of money where we can at the roadside.
Thank you.
Mr. McCartney.
Thank you, Chairman. Coming back to you, Mr. Morley, I know you had your hand up, you wanted to say something. If you want to go first and then ask my questions.
Yes, Chair, just to respond, the Protection of Freedoms Act allows for the timescales and structure under which parking operators both can notify the keeper of a charge and also obtain the keeper information from DVLA.
And I just want to quantify with some of the answers you gave to my colleague. There's 2.2 million of the £2.50-ish, something like that, requests that are parking companies. Then on top of that, there's local authorities as well, which is presumably another figure of enquiries.
I don't have that to hand, but
Could you let us have that? Would that be okay?
Easily, I can provide.
There was 38 local authorities you suspended because of data breaches.
Indeed.
Compared to how many in total of the local authorities and parking companies? Because parking companies, 22 you suspended?
22 private parking companies and 38 local authorities.
22 out of how many parking companies? And 38 out of how many is what I'm after?
Okay, I can give you that.
Because what those figures seem to infer that local authorities aren't very good at looking after people's data.
I can't comment.
I understand. Thirdly, is there anybody else that you sell the information to, such as insurance companies? And are you making a loss on what you sell to them?
We do also provide the information to insurance companies and also some credit checking companies as well, Experian, for example, where, so for example...
Is that on block rather than individuals?
It can be. If it's on block, it has to be fully audited, so we have to be confident that they're using it for the purposes to which it was assigned. For example, it might be being assigned to a vehicle leasing company. The information might be if someone is in default on a lease, for example.
And presumably you're not losing money on that?
I would presume not, but I would have to come back to you on that.
Okay.
I'm quite happy to provide the committee with the full detail on the data side of things.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Champion. Order, suspend meeting for 10 minutes. We've had some representations from Transport for London who say that you're not active enough in certifying new technology. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I think this is referring to the work we do for local authorities with the certification of enforcement cameras for parking and bus lanes. I'm very lucky that I've got two very top engineers who work on this. So I'm sorry, but I disagree with the TfL statement. I have an engineer who is highly regarded in digital engineering, and I have an engineer who is from the television industry, so they fully understand what they're doing, and part of their job is actually keeping up to date with technology. So I don't agree with the TfL observation.
There has been a comment that perhaps you're spending too much time looking for a private sector partner overseas and not concentrating on the work here. Is that a fair comment? I
don't see the relevance, Chair. So what is the connection between the two there?
Well, this is what's been suggested.
I'm not looking for partners overseas at all. I don't understand the relevance. And the work we do for the traffic cameras is only in the United Kingdom.
Are you looking for a private sector partner?
Well, there's a separate process which is being run by the Department for Transport, which VCA is supporting, called the New Commercial Models Project, which is a totally separate project, shall we say. So it's a DFT-run project we are supporting. It is part of government policy to look at areas through the efficiency and reform agenda. And there's a project that's looking for a joint venture partner for VCA in the future that will take it outside of the Department for Transport. The department is definitely not looking necessarily for an overseas partner. It's looking for a partner, a commercial partner, who will be a major shareholder in that project. The project is currently at the state of the procurement process and is a very exciting project for everybody at VCA.
Right, thank you. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for coming and answering our questions. Thank you. Sorry for keeping you waiting. I understand you want to make an opening statement.
I would thank you, Mrs. Owen. I'd be grateful for that opportunity because I mean, you will have seen that the department has already submitted extensive written evidence, but I think it would be helpful if I may be able just to make the opportunity to make a short statement. I think it's important because the Department for Transport and its motoring agencies are pursuing a programme of ambitious reform, a reform that will lead to better services and a reduction of costs. And where possible, this reduction will be returned, i.e. the reduction in costs, will be returned to service users in reduced fees and charges. And as with the change of this nature, there's a long way to go. But I think, I hope that you will acknowledge there has been some progress so far. Each agency has published its business plan for the coming year, and these set out ways in which we're going to accelerate that transformation. A number of changes for both the short and the medium term are already in place. DVLA is embarking on a major programme of IT transformation to deliver new and better services online. It's committed to achieving £160 million of net savings on 2013-14 by the end of 2016-17. That represents a 30% efficiency saving over the next 3 years. They're also leading the way in delivering government digital services, changing from a paper-based to a modern digital organisation. And 3 of the government's current 25 exemplars on digital exemplars are being developed by the DVLA. And you will have noted that the recent Riley review of the DVLA recommended that it accelerate the pace of digitalisation to bring a better customer experience. Further changes are on the way: new digital records, removal of the tax disc and the paper licence counterpart, and an opportunity to use direct debit to pay. The way that the DVLA is developing and delivering new digital services, I believe, is impressive. These services are being delivered quickly, more cost effectively, and can respond instantly to customer feedback and change. Applying the government's digital standard, DVLA will provide a new generation of digital services that will match the best from the private sector. And I'd like to suggest, and I hope that the committee will take up my invitation to undertake a visit to Swansea to see some of the developments that are being put in place. On the 2nd of April this year, we launched the new Driver and Vehicle Standards Agency, the DVSA, which merged VOSA and the DSA. The combination of these 2 agencies together, I think, will improve the provision of services. There has been the DVSA will focus on sharing ideas, expertise and functions more quickly and developing a single approach to common customers. There's been a huge shift in the way that we deliver HGV testing with now over 70% carried out at authorised testing facilities, which are not owned or run by the government. DVSA customers report that this saves them time and the costs of fuel and labour. This is a model that could potentially be used for other services, and DVSA is already working with partners to model new approaches to bring the driving test closer to customers as well. DVSA is exploring sites where the services of former DSA and VOSA can be combined, and those savings will be passed on to customers in the form of reduced fees. Lastly, the department has been exploring new commercial approaches to deliver better services. And whilst we recognise that one size does not fit all, there are good reasons in the case of the VCA for moving it into a more commercial world and away from the government. And therefore the department is looking at a joint venture with a private sector operator, and a process is underway to identify the best partner through open competition. The VCA provides a high quality and trusted service internationally, and I'm convinced that we can move to this model without losing that. I want to maximise its opportunities for growth and its contribution to the UK automotive market. I'm very clear that the agencies must continue to grow and develop. They must embrace change and innovation. They must deliver customer needs and services, and must deliver them in a convenient and effective manner. The Motoring Services Strategy of late 2012 said that we would put customers at the heart of everything we do, and I think that we've made a good start in doing that. We haven't shied away from some difficult decisions, but of course I recognise there is more to do.
Minister, you've spoken about making efficiency savings. How can you be assured that this doesn't just mean cuts in services?
Because some of the ways that we are delivering both, for instance, the DVLA digitalisation ensures that we still have the opportunity for people who need to have face-to-face contact through various methods to do so. But you're already seeing a huge shift towards digitalisation. If you look at the moment at for instance, 96% of all new vehicle registrations are now being done online. 97% of driving theory tests and driving practical tests, 94%, were booked online in the last year. So it's actually making it easier for customers to access those services, making them to be more cost efficient. It's making it's bringing, as I talked about in terms of the ATF in my opening statement, it's bringing services closer to the customer, making them more available and delivering cost savings.
What have you done to find out if any categories of customer are being left out in this? For example, people who live in rural areas where there might be access problems, and disabled people who may have difficulty using the systems. Have you done anything specific to see what's happening there?
I think, as I said, that we are the DVLA. In terms of were there to be a problem for disabled people, there is an arrangement with the Post Office to provide value for money services, including taxiing vehicles, renewing driving licences. If you haven't got the access to online, then you can still do it in that matter. If you look at the ATF spread, we've ensured that there's a very good geographic spread. In terms of the access to other services, in terms of the testing facilities, we've looked at there's a test centre within 20. We've set a standard of within 20 miles for everyone. I think we've hit a target of 93% on that so far. Is that right? 93%?
Yeah, I think if you looked at the nature of services that are being provided, then none of them are being excluded by the changes that we're making. So although you've mentioned a couple of times in the earlier session the digital by default, we're not saying we're going to all digital. All the agencies are keeping open various channels and looking to improve all the channels. The ambition, of course, is to make the digital channel the preferable channel. The service will be so good that people will choose themselves to use it, and in using it, as the Minister has already said, it's far cheaper for the agencies to do that, and that's where the efficiency savings come from.
So what mechanisms have you got in place to adjust the programmes if you find that people are being affected and people are being left out?
Well, I've set out a moment ago that there are mechanisms for that there is the post that people would presumably most likely go to then what they had seen as their previous source of access, particularly for licensing of vehicles in terms of tax or whatever. That facility is still in place with the Post Office.
Has the department specifically authorised driver data to be sold to third parties by the DVLA?
I think you're probably referring to car parking data.
That's correct.
Well, that data there is a licensing and a framework arrangement for data to be provided to car parking companies. But those car parking companies must be licensed by either their trade association or the local authority. The government has therefore set up a framework such that this is probably monitored. And where there are breaches of that, the company is suspended from receiving that data, or local authorities are suspended from licensing those companies.
You've spoken about a framework. Does that mean that the department authorises this activity?
No, as a normal contractual arrangement, the department authorises regulated car parking of companies that are regulated either by their trade association or their local authority to receive data in the enforcement of car parking.
And are you satisfied that there is no improper use of that information?
Well, as I've said a moment ago, Mrs. Elman, if there is improper use of that information, it's dealt with quickly and effectively. Hence, in the last year, we've taken action against 20 companies. There's been action against 20 companies, and 30 local authorities' regulatory ability to regulate has been suspended.
Do you consider that the DVSA pursues foreign drivers and hauliers for fines and penalties and as diligently as they pursue domestic offenders?
I believe that, quite rightly, the DVSA do that. If you have had the opportunity to go with them in terms of their targeted enforcement vehicles, so they absolutely pick up. They have a huge database of knowledge through the automatic number plate recognition system. They're able to target effectively hauliers, both UK and foreign, who have a poor record of maintenance, poor record of driver operations, and therefore work very effectively to do so. They absolutely they absolutely enforce against foreign drivers.
Are you satisfied with the requirements for gaining the certificate of professional competence? Do you think the requirements are rigorous enough? We've had some representation saying that they're not. Is that something you've ever looked at?
Well, we continually look at the certificate of professional competence. As you know, it was introduced some few years ago. It requires 35 hours of training over 5 years. There are some issues about it, some of which we're considering at the moment. I am considering whether or not there should be a safety element within the element of training. We're also looking at some other representations from organisations we've had. I think the concern, I think, for some people is that it might allow a repetition of the same training every year. I think that therefore, but I think if you speak to responsible hauliers, they understand the need to ensure their drivers are kept up to a level of professional competence. I think there's also a huge range of appropriate courses out there which are being offered, which people have to do. I think we are reviewing and have reviewed, and at the moment in the process of reviewing the CPC regulations, and I've particularly with regard to safety, as I said, we've had some representations where we're looking at that at the moment.
Mr. Stringer.
Just on that point, can I read you a quote from Leon Daniels of Transport for London, which doesn't sit easily with what you've just said about the certificate of professional competence. I apologise, it's a slightly long quote, but it's important. I went through a series of different sorts of syllabuses, including the Safer Urban Driving module, where we make PCV and HGV drivers ride bicycles around London. That was hugely illuminating, mostly for the PCV and HGV drivers. I could have got my driver at CPC by going to the same course in the same office on 5 consecutive days and sitting through the same syllabus on 5 consecutive days. At the end of that week, I would have the same card as I have now. It is entirely inappropriate that there is a shortcut that allows people to get their driver CPC in that way.
Well, first of all, I'm aware of Mr. Daniels' point. I'm also aware of what he and his organisation are lobbying for, which is a complete overhaul in terms of some of the rules, which is what I was alluding to a moment ago. You could, if you chose to do what he has just said, do that. That would be poor use of the driver's time. It would be poor use of their employer's time. It would involve a much tighter. If we were to go to the sort of regime he is talking about, we would have to accept there would be a huge additional cost burden, which isn't proven that actually it would do anything for safety. He and his organisation have yet to make that point. However, as I have said a moment ago in answer to Mrs. Elmer, we are looking at some representations, principally about the construction of the CPC. But in terms of, there is also a broad European review, and I think that the important thing is that we feed into that the UK, which is that it needs to make sure that we have drivers up to a level of professional competence whilst ensuring that the costs are proportionate.
As well as the safety aspect of what Daniel says, he talks about doing the test for the certificate of professional competence on 5 consecutive days. You implied that you had to do it on separate days over 5 years. I don't know very much about this, but there seems to be a conflict of what he was saying and what he is saying.
No, the two things are perfectly possible. What I'm saying is that every five, in a 5-year period, you have to have done 35 hours of training.
Right.
And therefore what he is saying is he his 7 hours of training for that particular year on 5 consecutive days.
Right, that makes sense now. Good, thank you.
Ms Champion.
2 questions, please. I was with my local transport police and we were specifically talking about foreign vehicles, and they were very concerned from sort of a health and safety point of view. They spoke very highly of the DVSA team, but said that they felt that they were sort of dramatically under-resourced for the scale of the potential problem. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I can't comment on that because I don't know exactly what they've said and how they're evidencing that. I think that I'm sure in an ideal world everybody wants more money for every particular subject, but the DVSA, I have robust discussions with the Chief Executive of the DVSA in terms of ensuring that he has what he needs to make sure the UK roads remain the safest roads in Europe. You will have heard me say that already the targeted system that they use enables us to be much more effective about stopping vehicles and making sure we're stopping the vehicles that are most likely to be causing health and safety or indeed vehicle maintenance issues. The enforcement of the new foreign vehicle duty means that we have particular ways of enforcing that through cameras, which again enables us to detect vehicles that are more likely to be coming into the United Kingdom and causing a problem. Without substance to the comment, I think it would be very difficult to make a detailed remark, but I would reject the idea that we don't resource the DVSA. And I would certainly reject the idea that we don't have safety as the paramount of what that organisation and what this government is trying to do.
My second question was going back to the DVLA and the selling of data to third parties, which I'm not overly comfortable with, but I was particularly surprised to realise that we're losing money on each of these transactions. Again, what are your thoughts on that?
Losing money on...
We were told by the Chief Executive that it was for the price that they're selling the data for isn't covering their costs.
Well, I assume that is part of the framework they've set up with the various companies. Overall, each agency has to set its fees levels at a level which will cover its costs. So I assume that they have decided that there is some cross-trade in that. Mr. Etheridge, is there anything else you want to add?
So, the Minister's absolutely right, they have to do that. I don't think they're losing a great deal of money on this, and I think that would be wrong if the impression was given that's the case. There is a constant fluctuation when you set a fee, and you have a number of fixed overheads, but your fee is, your fee throughput is variable. And we ask the agencies constantly to review their fees, and that will happen again this year as it's happened in previous years. And we work with the Treasury to make sure that we have a balance. So I think we wouldn't want it to be a case going forward that the agency doesn't fully recover its fees. It is quite difficult on a day-by-day, year-by-year basis to get that absolutely right. You have to keep readjusting to get that right, and I suspect that's the situation that was being described to you by the Chief Executive of DVLA.
Thank you, Chair.
How will the VCA benefit by becoming a joint venture with a private partner? What are you trying to obtain by doing that?
Well, I think that let me give you a very clear example, which I hope will explain the point. The Vehicle Certification Agency has an international reputation for what it does in terms of certifying vehicles. Some almost 18 months ago, the Chief Executive came to me and asked whether he might be allowed extra budget to exploit the possibility of setting up an office in Brazil, the cost of which I think, memory probably distorts, but I think it was about 600,000 to set the office up. Naturally some concern and question why. Well, the reason is because the Brazilians recognise the international reputation of the VCA and will allow them to certify vehicles coming into Brazil rather than the Brazilian vehicles, rather than a Brazilian certification agency. That by simply setting up an office there will enable us to export, enable UK PLC to export into Brazil and to get certification significantly quicker. What I think that therefore, but my point therefore is that this has been a huge boost to car exports into Brazil because the UK, it has that international reputation. So by the model we're suggesting and putting up, allowing it to partnership with the private sector, it will allow it to exploit further opportunities internationally to use its reputation as a certification agency but will allow those opportunities to be brought forward more quickly without having to necessarily reference through government funding some of the opportunities that are there, and yet at the same time remaining and having the benefit of government backing it as a type approval agency.
How's the project being run? How are you identifying an appropriate partner?
Well, this has been, Mrs. Elman, an ongoing project for about a year now. We first of all investigated the proposition about whether or not there was a benefit to moving it from the model it's currently into other models. We then tested which models would be most appropriate. We have finalised that the model that we're now proposing is most appropriate, and we're now effectively tendering for a private sector partner, and that will be done in the usual rigorous way.
And when do you expect that process to be completed?
I'm expecting that to be complete by July.
So at the moment, this is a standard government procurement process. That's the only avenue open to us to get a fair and open competition. We're at the stage of pre-qualification questionnaire at the moment, so we're looking at the prospective bidders. We'll examine those. A certain number will be taken to the next stage. We will then negotiate with them. We hope to be clear about that and have a new partner up and running before the election in 2015.
And how are you going to make sure it's a good deal for the British taxpayer?
So again, just with any procurement, we will have a set of criteria against which we'll measure the bidders. In setting up this arrangement, we're very, very clear about the number of things. One is we're expecting the partner to bring a great deal of benefit to the organisation. We're expecting it will be a requirement that we don't change the services that we currently offer to our current customers in any way, that we expect the same sort of level of service, the same sort of level of expertise to go forward. So this is bringing more to the organisation to enable it to grow in a way which it can't do under the constraints of being a government agency. If you think about it, the logic is absolutely clear. To grow, it needs to continue to demonstrate the value that it already has to customers. It would not be in our interests, not in the organisations and not in the joint venture partner, to begin to offer anything other than an improved service going forward.
And Mr. Stone, I apologise. In my answer to the last question, I said July. I meant that we'd be through the pre-qualification process by the end of July, and therefore, as Mr. Etheridge said, we'd be expecting to announce the partner prior to the election next year.
Thank you. And you've merged two of the motoring agencies. Why didn't you merge DVLA with DSA and BOSA? Did you consider merging those three?
I think the short answer is that we looked at a more joined up working arrangement across the agencies. We continue looking to make the processes better and simpler. But effectively what we have done is put together an operational agency, if you like, and a registration of licensing agency, and therefore I'm not convinced necessarily that, given the function, I think the functions we've done make sense at this stage. There's a lot of work to continue achieving those efficiency savings out of the first merger. We will keep it under review, but as yet I'm not convinced that, because there were obvious areas of skill overlap and obvious areas of operation that where they would fit more comfortably together, putting VOSA and DSA together. I'm not yet convinced that we need to make that next step with DVLA. We will, of course, as a department, have gone from 5 agencies down to 2 by the time of the next general election.
And do you think that vehicle excise duty has a long-term future as a form of motoring taxation?
Mrs. Elman, I think in the time-honoured fashion, this is a matter for the Treasury, and were I to stroll into it, first of all, the Treasury will happen, and secondly, my timescale in this job, whatever it will be shortened.
Have you thought of any other ways of collecting it? Should it continue?
Well, you will have seen, Mrs. Elman, that the Green Paper that I was responsible for as the Minister, which we published last year, looked at a number of comments in terms of that basically set out how the Highways Agency was going to move from an agency to a company. It also set out some ideas about funding. The final chapter of that discussed some methods of looking at potential ways of ensuring that we get private sector investment into the road sector and the highway sector in the future. It was very much the last chapter was very much a blue sky thinking piece. It certainly wasn't anything, and some of those ideas reflected possible remedies were that to be so, were VED to be no longer appropriate. But as I think it's probably fair to say that we've deliberately set this as something for the future, not something for now.
So, any further questions from members? No. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.